Khadijah, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Tani Brown. I'm the head of community for Jopwell. Jopwell is the leading career advancement platform for Black, Latinx, Native American students and professionals. And we're so excited to be speaking with Khadijah and Cureleaf today. Let's dive right in. Khadijah, you joined, I believe, this March, right? Or sometime earlier?
March 16th was my first day officially with Cureleaf, so at the height of the pandemic.
And you joined as Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility. So your purview includes investor relations, policy, business development, community impact, and then most recently, as we discussed, equity and inclusion. Before we dive in, can you just tell us about your career journey to Cureleaf and all of the different divisions that kind of roll up to you in this new role?
Wow, it's an interesting journey. I actually had this question a couple of months ago, and I thought I had this really nice, neat way of saying it. But, you know, I started my career with thinking about how to make a difference, right? I had a business degree, but I wasn't sure at the time if business was ready to think about people and social impact first. Social impact wasn't even a word when I started, right? It wasn't a concept in my mind. And so I went into social work, basically. I started working in nonprofits and on social issues. And then when I spent time at the Kennedy School a couple years ago, I realized that there is a way to have both, right? To use my analytical mind, my business sense, and my business acumen in the pursuit of doing good. And so Cureleaf and Cannabis was exploding at the moment. And I got a chance to meet Joe a couple years ago. And it's been, you know, a romance, so to speak, of how we can take all the good things that cannabis can provide in the business world and have a social impact and respond to some of the atrocious things that have happened to people of color as it relates to cannabis. And so, you know, they offered me an opportunity to have my dream job, so to speak, to work on business and social impact and in cannabis. And so I said yes. So that's 100%. How I got it. Yep.
100%. And especially for, you know, cannabis adjacent companies, leaders that are tuning in to our conversation, who were some of those early mentors and sponsors that helped to elevate your career? And I think this advice is really salient to leaders in the industry as they think about inclusion and talent.
Well, I will say Linda Green, who is a longtime political operative out of DC, happens to also be a cannabis owner at Anacostia Organics in DC, has been a tremendous mentor to me, both in cannabis and outside of cannabis. And Marie Johns, also out of DC, who spent a great deal of time leading and as a Black woman in tech, or just as an executive in the tech world. And the thing that they said to me was, if this is the burning thing, then go after it, right? Yeah. You're prepared, and stand in your understanding that the perspective that you have is unique to you, and stand with that having value, right? Because and I'll be honest with you, as a little Black girl growing up in the South, you know, there were some limitations to what I could be, right? Whether they were real limitations or perceived. And so it shaped how I showed up in spaces. And I didn't always show up with a true value or an understanding of the value that I bring to any table. In the last 5 or 7 years, I'm really clear about what that value is, and I lead with that value. So
absolutely, absolutely. And then to kind of, you know, take that step forward, the cannabis industry, it's on the brink of unprecedented growth and impact. Right. And we talked about this in our pre-call, and as we prepared for this, an idea that you and I kept returning to was holistic strategy, right? Of course, I think part of what Jopwell focuses on is that top of the funnel pipeline and recruitment. Something that you kept mentioning, which I completely agree with, is that recruitment and hiring are only small pieces of the puzzle, you know, to moving the dial. And I want to open the discussion up as you think about other parts of the strategy, right, that companies and leaders should be thinking about? We discussed supplier diversity, bylaws, employee experience, right? What are some of those other critical parts of a holistic strategy as the cannabis industry really tries to, again, advance DE&I at this time?
Right. You know, I think there's been a lot of lip service paid to, we want to create an inclusive industry and we want to make sure that there are tons of pathways. But, you know, there are very few companies that are really poised to do that. And it was one of the reasons why I chose, because I'm an activist, right? I come from the activist community. And, you know, to go from the activist community into industry isn't always an easy transition. But one of the reasons why I chose Cureleaf specifically is because I saw an opportunity to do exactly what you're saying, right? Expand the idea of what equity and inclusion really means beyond a hiring and recruitment stance. While hiring and recruitment is absolutely essential, and if you have the best hiring strategy and you're great with recruiting, you get people into the environment, and the environment doesn't allow for them to show up as their whole self and contribute in a way that is meaningful for them and the company, then you've done all that work for nothing. And so when I say expand this idea of the ecosystem of equity inside of the industry, or in Curaleaf specifically, I'm talking about a board of directors, right? I'm talking about the way that we spend our dollars, the way that we actually decide how we're going to influence legislation. How do we want to, as a company, extend all of our resources to the benefit of those who have been most criminalized by marijuana's criminalization? And so to that end, I get to play in a lot of different spaces. I'm having conversations with our IT team, right? I'm having conversations with our GR team in our retail spaces, which for me, I say this almost on every interview, that I am pleasantly surprised, but I shouldn't be, because the cannabis culture in general is an inclusive community, right? And so it makes sense that the folks that are working inside of Cureleaf, whether it's rank and file in our cultivation and warehouse facilities, those folks actually get it. They're the people who are sending emails to our diversity emails saying, hey, have you thought about this? I would love for us to think about ways that we could improve our environmental footprint. And we, you know, all of these things are bubbling up. And my job is a heavy lift, and sometimes it keeps me up at night, is building an infrastructure that allows for all of that to find a place to be able to be executed on and operationalized in systems and not one-offs.
Right, right. And a follow-up question to that, as leaders think through this infrastructure that you mentioned, you know, what has been your biggest challenge to date? And I always frame challenges as opportunities to my team, right? And how do you as a leader think about problem solving, overcoming some of these obstacles that you've talked about as you build this infrastructure?
Right. So, you know, when you have a company as large as Cureleaf and as focused on growth as Cureleaf, while issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion are primary in the minds of our leadership, it can sometimes get lost when we're trying to close an acquisition, right?
Right.
And so for me, and what I say to my team and my extended team, because I get to work with brilliant people all across the disciplines for Cureleaf, is that let's build it. And when the window of opportunity presents itself, we'll have something. And sure enough, I mean, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we started this work as soon as I hit the ground, building an infrastructure and a plan. And as soon as the moment that George Floyd's murder provided, we were able to, because we had the plans in place, to begin to say, hey, here's an excellent opportunity for us to have this extended conversation with our internal community, so that we now have this robust diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm so excited that you guys are going to be joining us as a part of this work. We have our task force where, you know, we've launched our employee resource groups, and the kinds of conversations, and quite honestly, some of the recommendations and the problem solving that's going on inside of these ERGs are going to have a tremendous impact on our business. because we are including voices in this work that perhaps didn't have a way to insert their voice before.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, again, to summarize your points that I'm hearing, and I couldn't agree more, have that plan, build the infrastructure, because to your point, I think so many organizations were caught flat-footed when this moment happened. Another that I'm hearing is to create spaces for folks, especially your team, your employees. They have the ideas and they want to show up, but create spaces where they can really thrive, and build that infrastructure, which is so important. So many organizations think it's just one or two, or it falls on one or two people. But to your point, it's strategy and it is true infrastructure. You know, something you said also in our prep call that really struck me was just doing business as usual has created exclusivity. And I thought that was such a powerful statement. And I wanted to give you a chance to just unpack that a little bit, especially for individuals who might be tuning in and realizing for the first time that that's true.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I share this because, you know, I have a network, and my network is based on the kind of work that I've done, the social groups that I am a part of, the school that I went to. And so if I am looking in my network, only in my network, I'm generally going to get somebody probably from the Harvard community or from the academic community, someone from public health. Individuals will come into my circle who are part of the African American community, the queer identified community, and the woman community, because that's how I exist in the world. And if you have a bunch of leaders of a company who all have the same gender, generally come from the same kind of industry, one or two different schools, then you're always that's all you're going to have in terms of insight and decision making. And when you look at cannabis in particular, the consumer base is some of the most diverse community populations there are. And if all you have making decisions and getting insights are from a small group of that particular consumer base, you're going to end up becoming the blockbuster of cannabis. And I'm glad that our leadership is looking for ways to make sure that we don't, and that we continue leading in every aspect of our business.
That's exactly right. And again, I think we should put that on a poster card, that just doing business as usual has created exclusivity. I love that so much because it's such a simple but profound idea. And I think it challenges all of us to think differently about the way that we're doing business. You provided a great segue into this next question, but you have served on many boards, corporate advisory. I was fangirling, doing all of the background here. Human rights, medicine, female-centric, LGBTQA. How has your background positioned you, for this unique moment in time for the cannabis industry? You talked about the kind of diversity and range of consumers. How are you pulling from all these different backgrounds? And I think using that as a thesis for diversity of thought. But how has this really positioned you for this moment?
Yeah, so one of the things that I try to keep in mind is just because I've shown up to a space doesn't mean that space wasn't full of ideas and people and concepts before me, because that's what I've had to contend with my entire career. I will walk into a space and people would assume that just because they are now recognizing me, that I'm new to it. And so to answer your question, I think my entire life story, along with my career, has positioned me to be, and this is not ego at all, to be the best person for the work that I'm intending to do with Cureleaf right now. Because we're working at the intersection of cannabis and almost everything else. Cannabis in health, cannabis in the queer community, cannabis and criminal justice, cannabis and you name it. And so given that I've had an incredible breadth of experience, in which I will give that to my grandmother, who just made sure that I was doing almost any and everything else. I was born in the South, so cooking is your birthright, right? But she made sure that I also was exposed to other kinds of things. And she pushed me, and in the way that she did wasn't necessarily ways that I welcomed, but I appreciate that now I can show up and think about the diversity of experience, thought, and come to a understanding of what may be the best path forward that is inclusive of all of those things. And so, you know, sometimes it can become a little cumbersome trying to juggle the priorities of all of those intersections, depending on, you know, whatever space that I'm working in. But at the end of the day, if I stay committed to putting in the central question, who is best served for this, then I feel like we get to the answer, right? And when I work in cannabis specifically, I'm often talking to activists, business leaders, and industry players. And one of the things that I would, if anybody who's listening, they fall into any of those stakeholder groups, it is really understanding there's the role for each of those stakeholder groups to play. And then there's a place at the intersection where all three major stakeholder groups can get together and come to some consensus. And that's where the real opportunities are. And I am hopeful that over the next, 1 to 3 years, that we really will meet at that intersection and come up with something great, not only for individuals that have been harmed by the war on drugs, but communities and patients who haven't had access to this incredible plant, right? That we're going to get to a place where industry and government understand that they can actually work in partnership to deliver a quality plant or medicine-based plant, plant-based medicine, let me get it together, plant-based medicine for folks to be able to impact their lives in a very positive way. We can actually say to communities of color that there's an opportunity to improve your economic outlook, because we understand that there are collateral consequences that have been severe for individuals and communities. And I think it's time for the industry to welcome the community as partners in addressing that, and vice versa for the community. You don't have to be at odds. It doesn't always have to be an adverse situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just taking notes here. Key takeaways, ask the right question. That's so important. Who does this serve? Who is this for? Because that answer is going to move the needle and be so profound in how you hire, how you distribute. And then I'm also hearing, find those intersections, right? Find those ways to, when you're going to have to collaborate, which is absolutely massive. I think this next question also comes off of the heels of what you're saying. And this is a dialogue you and I have started to have. How do you approach, and this is such an important question, I think, for everyone tuning in, how do you approach destigmatization of the cannabis industry, especially pre-legalization, as you're speaking with suppliers, especially minority suppliers, which is going to be such an important way, to move the needle on diversity in this industry? How do you start to broach those topics?
So I like to share with people that, when I first started thinking about cannabis as a true game changer for communities that were impoverished. And so I came at this really trying to understand how to interrupt poverty, because poverty was connected in many cases to the criminal justice system and all of the ways in which communities have been harmed by, right? So I came at it from that ending.
Right.
And so I remember connecting with Black farmers in the South, because I'm from Alabama. So I was like, they were having a conference in Jackson. I'm going to go, and I'm going to, this is going to be the cash cow for our communities, right? Black farmers were struggling to keep their, that's a whole nother issue to address. But, could we find a crop? And cannabis could be that crop. And so I went down there making my pitch that this was the thing that was going to save our farms. We're going to be able to take our communities back. And they looked at me like, sis, what are you talking about? You want us to grow drugs on our property? What are you talking about? Drugs have destroyed our community. And so, they gave me a very polite spanking, but it helped reframe my thinking and my understanding about the trauma that's really associated for many folks in this plant, right? And so when I think about diversifying and creating inclusive spaces on the employment front and on the supplier diversity front, I can't ignore that there's a relationship between some communities that, you know, is not, oh, let's jump on this green rush, right? There's some real issues that we have to address. And part of it is reframing the discussion between communities of color, business owners, what have you, potential employers, medicine, public health folk, to say, hey, I know that this plant has been criminalized and demonized, and it has had an entire negative repercussion in our community. But if we could just step back, try to think differently, and open ourselves to a different conversation, might we think about coming from finance to cannabis? Mm-hmm. Can we come from, you know, another sector or industry and bring that talent to cannabis? Mm-hmm. Can we, and are we in a position as business owners and suppliers to put aside kind of what our moral question may be and understand from a business opportunity, and what do we need to do as leaders in cannabis to help situate that conversation and invite people into that conversation? And part of what I'm looking at doing is having, so this is a little bit of information we're announcing here. Part of our social equity programming, I'm going to be hosting every month on First Fridays, a conversation with the community to destigmatize and demystify cannabis, right? And so we're going to take on these various interesting topics, you know, cannabis and the health community, cannabis and veterans, and we're going to have some real interesting conversations. You know, maybe I'll have you on for one of those to talk about how we demystify the employment and getting connected into the cannabis industry, because that's where it starts. We have to start having conversations and being honest, transparent, and frank.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. That was absolutely huge. You know, and I think in addition to that, I think how has Cureleaf responded, you know, this past summer, the summer of 2020, which we will always remember for the rest of our lives. Right. We're going through also a racial reckoning in this country that is then being reflected in various impact to industries. You know, this moment in time, how did you ensure that Cureleaf responded? What were the first 3-5 steps that you took internally as a business leader with your colleagues, with your leaders? You know, this is one of the top questions that Jopwell gets as we support companies and their responses, both public and internal. You know, how has this summer really impacted how you all do business and speak with each other?
Well, one, we had a lot of meetings. But the leadership had some really tough conversations. Interesting things that we had to, as the leaders of this company, say, who is Cureleaf in this moment? And what we decided was that we needed to go internal first. A lot of companies decided that they were going to put things out publicly, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I applaud folks who did that. But we felt like, because we were coming off of acquisition of Select, so we had these two companies coming under one umbrella, a slew of new hires, that it was important that we went internal. So one of the first things that we did was have a town hall. And we brought the CEO and our chief marketing officer into a conversation directly with our teammates inside. And we had a really tough set of questions posed to us. And what came of that is what you're seeing now with the diversity, equity, and inclusion. Also, what came out of that is the Social Equity Task Force, which was a cross-functioning team of leaders saying, hey, this is important to us. We want to get it right. We're going to ask what are all the ways that Cureleaf can show up in this space? And our programming over the next 6 months is a direct result of those conversations this summer.
Very helpful, and I think really useful for other leaders to see, you know, what contemporaries leaders in the space are doing. A lot of the time we see it just really takes the courage to pump the brakes on something that might be happening internally and really restructure the dialogue and get back to what infrastructure means, to your point. 33 states have legalized medical cannabis, 11 for adult recreation, 5 states have it on the ballot this year. With legalization imminent, what is the cannabis industry's responsibility to DE&I? And for those that are listening, DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But with, again, this unprecedented moment in time, where do you see the future headed?
So, when I think about the tech industry and all of the conversations over the last 5 to 7 years about the importance of making sure that there's space for the other, and the other happens to be people of color, women, people with disabilities, individuals who show up as members of the LGBTQ community. And so the cannabis industry is not going to be any different, except for we're starting out with the question. We're not going to get 10 years into this incredible rise for cannabis and look back and say, oh, where are all the people of color? Where are the women leaders? Where are veterans? And have we, thought about ways to create opportunities for individuals that are differently able? We're having those conversations right now. Every association that Cureleaf is a part of, we are beginning as a company to say, where's our responsibility? What are we actually doing at every possible level to address this? And it's not easy because, for one, we're a pretty new industry, regulated industry, and we are heavily regulated. For instance, in many states, the regulations bar us from actually employing individuals with criminal felony charges related to drug possession or marijuana. Right? And so when I go out into communities and I'm saying we're looking for opportunities for second chance employment, we're looking for individuals to engage in our mentoring programs that we're beginning to have, we recognize that there's a regulatory barrier to actually us doing the kind of good that we want to do, right? How do we create a pipeline of folks who have been criminalized by marijuana's criminalization into the regulated space? Well, there is a significant regulatory barrier. So when I say the coming of the intersectionality, government saying to industry, we're going to reduce this regulatory barrier so that you as an industry player can actually do some good, is the conversation I'm looking forward to having. Call me if anybody's listening.
No, they will. Khadijah, thank you so much. I always try and end conversations with more of a fun question. As, the pandemic continues to roll on, what are you looking forward to the most, coming out of this pandemic with regards to, work-life balance and the future of work in the cannabis industry? I'm sure you have all been remote, but your industry scans from manufacturing to, so many different sectors. How has the pandemic shifted your workspace, and how is Cureleaf kind of pivoting to this unique moment? What does the future look like for you guys?
Oh man, maybe, I don't know. Maybe I should have listened to Joe and Jason's talk to figure out what the future. I can say that some of the things that we are focused on as a company is making sure that our internal employee base is safe and secure. We are looking at, in terms of my work in CSR, we are looking to generate some relationships that are outside of cannabis that help us really began to destigmatize cannabis. Sometimes, people hear cannabis and they don't want us at the foundation tables. They don't necessarily want to always take our dollars or allow our employees to participate. And I get it. We still have a ways to go. But, looking forward, I am looking forward to an opportunity to really engage with the public more regarding the work that Cureleaf is doing, specifically around environmental sustainability, what we're doing in the D&I space, obviously, social equity, and all of that work is going to be crucial to a federalized legal state for cannabis, right? Obviously, we're still under the old regulatory barriers, but in 3 to 5 years, if we have an opportunity to really have a conversation about what marijuana's legalization looks like across the board, then I want to make sure that Cureleaf is positioned to take advantage and leverage and maximize the conversations that we've been having in these spaces, building these incredible programs that will ultimately make what I consider to be some significant social impact in communities that have been suffering from marijuana's criminalization. So a lot of good stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I had so much fun in this conversation. We could go back and forth for hours, but I just want to thank you so much for being here, creating this content for the Growth Conference. And Jopwell certainly looks forward to working with you. I can't wait to dive in. There's a lot of important work to be done. So we're very honored to have you at the helm.
Thank you so much. I look forward to it. And I'm so excited that we're going to get a chance to work together. So thank you.